In the dim light of medieval Europe, survival was a perilous game of chance. Imagine the air thick with the stench of rotten smoke, each breath a gamble with unseen sickness. Step to the village well, where clear waters hid the poison of cholera, shared with livestock like a sinister communion. Fires, rash and consuming, crackled in straw-thatched homes, turning safety to ash at the whim of a stray ember. As spring neared, granaries echoed with emptiness, offering only mouldy grain to the starving. Howling wolves and prowling bandits waited at the village edge, a heart-stopping reminder that in this world, every dawn was borrowed time. Imagine stepping into a medieval village, the air itself a dense, invisible menace, waiting to uncover its mysteries. The miasma theory held villagers in thrall, the belief that bad air, laden with disease, was the enemy they couldn't see but lived with daily. Frighteningly, without modern germ theory, they weren't entirely wrong. Disease and foul smells went hand in hand, and wherever there was rot, illness was sure to follow. Chroniclers like Henry of Huntingdon wrote of these scents, linking decay with outbreaks of sickness. The miasmas came from stagnant swamps, decomposing refuse, and lacked hygiene. These elements formed an ever-present cloud that influenced medieval life, dictating where people built their homes and what protective measures they wove into daily life. This belief system was etched into every corner of existence. Carrying pungent herbs might stave off the danger of these invisible foes, an ages-old habitual deviation into what today seems oddly prescient. Instances where aromatic plants inadvertently provided protection mirror our antiseptic methods, showing how folklore and rudimentary health measures often touched upon truth. In a way, these medieval villagers were onto something significant, as they manoeuvred through an unsettling atmospheric dance with diseases, warding off bad air in a bid to survive. Essential to daily life was smoke from hearths, yet it was a double-edged sword. Flames danced in every home, warming and cooking, while at the same time filling interiors with choking smoke, tinting walls with layers of soot. Lacking chimneys or ventilation, smoke became a constant, defining their respiratory experience with petty rebellions against clear air. It was the eternal irony of medieval life, where the source of heat and security was also a consistent health threat. The outside was not much better. Every forge and kiln contributed further, creating a perpetual haze mingled with the odours of waste and decay. No organised waste management meant villages were expanses of filth and smell, with sewage ditches running through public spaces. Chroniclers immortalised these destabilising fragrances, sharing the harsh sensory environments born from these conditions. The pervasive dread during plagues only magnified these fears. Pandemics struck with sobering consistency, and it was the miasma theory that shaped medieval comprehension of such disasters. With each grim arrival, the fear that foul air was divine punishment or a cruel curse only deepened. The Black Death's unforgiving march across Europe underlined the correlation, as entire communities fell to its shadow. The air's contamination seemed confirmed, and panic spread as fast as the sickness. Stories tell of how towns would burn incense or ring church bells, desperate to cleanse the polluted air. Sinister asphyxiation wasn't the only concern. Family members were quarantined, or entire squares set alight to purify through smoke. The relationship with aromas was not contained to peril, it was also in mundane life's embrace. Medieval noses became artisans of survival in odour's tapestry, learning to distinguish threats within the reek of market meats and drains. Food smothered in spice told of pragmatism, masking spoiling produce. Meanwhile, places of care, like almshouses, were verdant with medicinal herb smells, a hopeful olfactory battle against the day's ailments. This unseen language of smells charted an immune defence map amidst a familiar airscape, as villagers determined remedies by what their senses collected. In their world, combating miasmas was critical, using both senses and superstition. Many feared that the air carried evil spirits, from burning rosemary to carrying herb-filled amulets. It was believed that through scent one could repel such spirits. It was practical and myth entwined, where life demanded every advantage against mystifying threats. Some towns even had smellers, individuals versed in distinguishing deadly air from benign, a quirky yet earnest role placing trust in human faculties as the ultimate guide. This intuition-driven survival urged villagers to their own methods of maintaining air's safety through observation and folk invention. Chroniclers like Henry of Huntingdon captured the grim reality of air as an integral adversary. Their vivid accounts enduringly document tales of families ravaged by mystery illnesses, towns grappling with ambient threats, and the frail human endurance amid foulness. Detailed sensory chronicles illuminated these lived realities, the foul yet captivating character of medieval air enduring across time. Observers like Huntingdon laid foundational stones for much later sanitation methods through understanding, albeit instinctual, of environment and sickness linkage, revealing the symbiosis of people surrounded by impurities, shaping medieval life. The miasma theory permeated every aspect of life, from urban design to ritual habits. Where they lived and how they interacted with their environment often hinged on perceptions of air quality. Villagers planned settlements to avoid malodorous swamps, opting for perceived safety amongst aromatic woods. Buildings reflected this understanding, with the large churches offering sanctuary from the putrid, narrow residential spaces. The grip of miasmas as cultural thread enmeshed folklore, necessity, and adaptation, culminating in a world where the ephemeral quality of air dictated survival. In such a reality, a breath could either bring salvation or its unnerving opposite, tying well-being directly to the consequential amphitheatre of smells swirling ceaselessly around them. In the medieval world, the soothing trickle of a stream or the silent depth of a well was more than mere backdrop. It was life's artery. Villages leaned heavily on these water sources, drawing from them not only life-sustaining liquids, but also all manner of social interaction and cultural habit. Streams and rivers were the great equalisers, gathering all classes to their banks for gossip, trade, and ritual. However, what the villagers couldn't see or understand was the ghostly presence of pathogens lurking in each swallow, shadowing their existence with threats they could scarcely imagine. The medieval belief system revered water as both a literal and spiritual cleanser. Yet, beneath this reverence lay peril, a peril that manifested in waves of sickness they couldn't comprehend. Michelangelo had yet to paint, and microorganisms wouldn't be discovered for centuries. Disease was instead chalked up to miasmas, bad air, or divine displeasure. Still, evidence today tells us that many illnesses, like cholera and dysentery, churn through polluted streams and wells. Archaeological digs reveal all too well how closely waste pits lay to these water sources, the foul runoff slipping silently into their drinks, sowing illness in secret. The whispers of medieval chroniclers paint a picture of stoic endurance against a backdrop of harsh climates and invisible adversaries. It was a time when disease outbreaks surged like storm tides, sapping life, resilience, and community spirit. Irony lingered heavily in the very thing that sustained them. Water, a symbol of purity, ironically possessed the power to wreak havoc, turning the act of drinking into a gamble with fate. Yet in those villages where life seemed impossibly tethered to death, survival continued, guided by necessity more than knowledge. Amidst these challenges, water retained a mystical significance. Rituals woven into the very fabric of medieval life often involved water, from baptisms to the blessing of wells, marking it as a shield against malevolent spirits and rampant disease. Communities clung to these rituals for some measure of control, sanctifying their water sources in desperate appeals to cleanse themselves of life's misfortunes. The tragedy lay in the faith that what they revered as protective shield also brought illness. Livestock compounded these unsanitary challenges. Cows, sheep and goats were the village lifeblood, though they shared rather rudely the same water sources, leaving behind waste that fed parasites and disease. The villagers, profoundly dependent on these animals for survival, found themselves locked in an unwitting cycle of contamination. Water shared with livestock became an unwelcome battleground, where human survival was at odds with nature's indifference. Seasonal changes only heightened these hazards. Spring's lush rains, though vital, could swell riverbanks, mingling refuse with already tainted water, a grim reminder of nature's impartiality. As seasons turned, familiarity with such dangers was passed through generations, villages adapting their habits to these rhythms, moving with syncopated steps to nature's beat. But unable to stop the vile contamination that continued unabated. Faced with chronic illness, medieval communities employed all that they could muster. This included communal efforts to designate waste disposal areas, rudimentary at best, and turning to healers who mixed herbs and incantations in valiant but often futile efforts to stave off disease. In these efforts, practical actions met spiritual remedies in an uneasy alliance, underscoring the medieval mind where faith and lived experience were inseparable. Even as feudal ridges defined social classes, access to purer water also followed this divide. Peasants gathered at public wells, while the elite sipped from private fountains, perhaps filtrated and cleaner, carving distinctions in longevity and quality of existence. Yet water's indifference transcended wealth, and even the nobility were not spared from the ravages of disease, showing that no amount of wealth could fully shield against ignorance of sanitation. Beneath all this ran an undercurrent of anxiety, a gnawing fear exacerbated by the capriciousness of illness. Communities shared in each agony, the psychological toll weaving itself into the very fabric of their lives. Despite proximity, sickness seemed an untamed force, a grim spectre lurking unseen, dismantling the great social weave one frayed thread at a time. Carefully reasoned superstitions and rites became a kind of armour against the unpredictable world, yet it was an armour all too often pierced by experience. Reflecting on these medieval dynamics provides a window into human resilience in the face of adversity. Despite limited knowledge, these communities demonstrated remarkable adaptability, crafting strategies, however imperfect, to deal with waterborne threats. While the medieval world was daunting, the persistence of ritual and belief amidst a harsh reality reveals a profound connection to a universe both mystical and indifferent. Their experience, deeply rooted in survival, whispers across centuries to remind us just how far we've come in public health and yet how close we remain to those early struggles. This tale of water not only explores a historical landscape, but compels reflection on today's global challenges, underscoring the intrinsic dance with nature, hauntingly timeless, that defines the human endeavour. Imagine a medieval village where the rhythmic crackling of fires accompanied daily life, a necessity both feared and revered. In the heart of these villages, the hearth held a place as vital as it was potentially catastrophic. Families gathered around it for warmth, meals and camaraderie, yet each flicker carried a latent threat to the wooden and thatched structures hovering nearby. Wooden beams strained under the warmth of stone chimneys, while straw-thatched roofs lay ready to ignite with the slightest errant ember. Homes huddled close together, allowing fire to leap from one roof to another swiftly, turning a helpful, friendly flame into a devastating monster overnight. Fire's usefulness was inescapable. It was the nucleus around which medieval life revolved, from baking bread to smelting metal, from crafting pottery to dyeing cloth. Every essential activity relied on the transformative power of fire. Yet with each flicker signalling warmth and productivity, there loomed a shadow of destruction. Chroniclers of the time documented instances of flickering light that transformed into ferocious blazes, reducing entire villages to mounds of smouldering ash. History recounts numerous infernos illustrating this relentless danger. The Great Fire of London in 1135 is etched in collective memory as a prime example of how flame, when untamed, could obliterate homes, markets and lives. Equally harrowing was the burning of Southwark in 1212, a fervent reminder of how vulnerable urban spaces were to fiery calamity. These events left indelible marks on culture, governance and architecture as medieval society grappled with these fiery beasts. City officials and rulers slowly began recognizing the need for change, incorporating stricter building regulations and tentatively implementing primitive firefighting techniques. Yet despite advances, countless charred ruins across Europe bore testament to fire's unyielding and unforgiving nature. Medieval fire laws were rudimentary, but nevertheless pivotal in trying to stave off persecution by fire. Authorities enacted ordinances aimed at reducing risk by mandating less flammable materials for structures. Stone chimneys became a hopeful, albeit scarce, alternative to wooden ones, and tiles gradually replaced thatched roofing. City statutes from the 12th century onward began prohibiting fires during dry and windy conditions, an early acknowledgement of prevention's value. In villages, managing fire safety was as much about culture as law. Fire watch rotations became a community standard, with villagers taking turns to be vigilant against rogue sparks. Instructions were shared widely, urging everyone to smother embers at night and carefully douse flames before retreating to bed. Though decentralised, these communal efforts wove an intricate fabric of shared responsibility, hoping to stave off the dread of an uncontrollable blaze each night. When the inevitable happened and fire rampaged through a community, the aftermath tested resilience and unity. Rebuilding from blackened foundations was a laborious task stretched over months or even years, as families relied heavily on neighbouring help to reconstruct homes. Community spirit shone as vital assistance, manifesting in manual labour, the provision of materials, or sometimes a forgiveness of taxes by lords for those struck hardest by loss. This recurrence of disaster nurtured a fierce tenacity among medieval villagers, an acceptance that life with fire was about learning to coexist with danger. Hearths held central importance. not only as a core refuge against the cold, but as a place of physical and social sustenance. Here, stories were passed down, including those critical tales of fire management and survival, gradually building a generational tapestry of hard-earned wisdom. Practical skills, painstakingly honed over time, saw villagers mastering the balance of ensuring warmth without inciting unintended peril. Generations refined rudimentary firefighting methods, from lining roofs with buckets of sand or water to forming swift-acting bucket brigades that exemplified cooperation under duress. Neighbourly bonds became the sinews holding communities together, and the spirit of common cause fostered vigilant watchfulness over each other's homes. A neighbour's loss was not isolated sorrow, but shared grief, driving villages to band together in adversity. These experiences deepened relationships, strengthening communal ties and igniting new traditions among those who survived. Culturally, the impact of fire wove its way into folklore and legend, stories shared around nighttime fires that blended history with cautionary narrative. It elevated fire from a mere element to a mystical force, locked in a dance with humanity, provoking both awe and respect. Tales spun through the ages warned of fire gods and playful spirits wielding fire for mischief or malevolence. Such narratives etched cautionary reminders into the popular lore, ensuring each generation learned of prudence through parable. An enduring irony saturated medieval life. The same element that warmed and endured was capable of utter destruction. Fire was a creator, essential in crafting life's necessities from metal to sustenance, yet its destructive potential loomed persistently. Innovations in building and crafting relied on elemental fire mastery, sparking curiosity even amid its dangers. Alchemists, artisans, and philosophers pondered the dichotomous relationship, fascinated by humanity's reliance on and fear of this omnipotent force. Today, the medieval dance with fire offers us timeless lessons in resilience and recovery. While modern advances have significantly mitigated fire risk, the human element, courage, community, and cooperation remains unchanged. As we gaze upon city skylines or rustic countryside vistas, echoes of the medieval struggle with fire remind us of our ancestors' indomitable spirit against nature's mighty but indifferent forces. The age-old saga of survival persists today, binding us to those who once gathered around their own hearths under the watchful glow of flickering flames. Spring, the season of renewal and growth, ironically unfurled as a cruel paradox for medieval villagers, pushing them to the brink of desperation. Picture this: a villager standing in a quiet, dust-laden granary, lamenting how winter's once bountiful stores had dwindled to mere handfuls of grain. March was a time when the distinction between survival and starvation blurred. Hunger was more than skipping a meal. It was a grim spectre looming over families, threatening to claim lives before the first crops were sown. The hunger season began slowly, gnawing not just at bellies but at the very structure of medieval society. It tested community bonds, turning trust brittle and compelling even the most steadfast into considering theft. This period exposed life's fragility, dictated by an unforgiving agricultural calendar. Survival often hinged on balancing the art of sharing with the necessity of hoarding, a precarious dance fraught with moral implications. As spring approached, food stores would transform into sinister stockpiles of mouldy grain. The villagers, faced with grim choices, often opted for churning stomachs over empty ones. Meals became menacing concoctions, assembled from what scant resources could be cobbled together. Imagine the acrid stench of fermenting grains brewed into foul ales, mocking the senses even as they provided scant nourishment. Yet the stakes were higher than mere disgust. Eating poorly stored grain carried the risk of ergotism, a disease from contaminated rye that induced painful symptoms reminiscent of both madness and fire. Meals became gambles, each bite a reminder of their perilous proximity to famine. The irony loomed large. The very nourishment meant to sustain life held the potential for lethal danger. In those lean months, the promise of new growth often arrived heartbreakingly late. The green shoots that should have signified renewal offered no immediate solace to starved families. The weakest, children and the elderly, could ill afford to wait for spring greens. Malnutrition exacted a heavy toll, turning mere survival into a grave gamble. Waning hope lay heavy as parents sacrificed diminished meals for their children, each morsel a prayer. Ironically, spring's eventual bounty sometimes marked only the resting places of the fallen. The earth, indifferent, cradled the living sprigs and the newly dead alike. These harsh conditions weren't universal. The curse of the lean season was disproportionately borne. Nobles, cocooned by wealth, faced no such dire hardships. Within fortified manors, lords revelled in security, their larders filled with preserved meats and grains. This imbalance, rooted in medieval hierarchy, illustrated a society where birthright dictated who thrived or merely survived. Desperation sometimes simmered into rebellion. Desperate years bore witness to unrest, as hungry peasants eyed the nobles' excess with resentful longing. The cries of hungry children contrasted sharply with the wealth of feast-laden halls, revealing societal rifts ripe for revolt. Though outright rebellion was rare, the divide between feast and famine remained a poignant reminder of embedded injustice. Behind this seasonal suffering lay the roots in medieval agriculture's vulnerabilities. Crop failure was an ever-present threat, with inclement weather and pests jeopardizing entire harvests. A harsh winter could echo scarcity through successive seasons. Famine was rarely isolated, often cascading through a series of crises straining medieval subsistence farming's fragile ecosystem. Nature's unpredictability only deepened these vulnerabilities. Heavy rains waterlogged fields, while droughts left them barren. The peasants' dependence on forces beyond control underscored the precarious balance between man and nature. Their annual cycle a gamble, eyes turned skyward each spring, weighted by hope and fear. But hunger was not the sole threat. It invited disease. Malnutrition compromised immune systems, rendering starved bodies ripe for epidemics. Typhus and fever thrived in such environments, exacerbating the physical and emotional toll on villagers. As infectious diseases swept through weakened communities, what should have been simple ailments now bore the weight of death sentences. Villages echoed with coughs, whispered prayers lingering against cold church walls. Communities, despite the adversity, relied on the tangible strength of shared suffering. The lean season was a communal test, transforming individual scarcity into collective hardship. The communal pot, both symbol of solidarity and grim reminder of limited resources, united families in seeking resolution. Despite the strain, these months solidified communal bonds, fostering resilience and tenacity. Survival through spring was often a communal affair, rites marked not just by flowering flora, but shared relief. Losses, however, were mourned collectively, celebration and survival an enduring testament. These trials also shaped the cultural ethos. Villagers became skilled in resourcefulness, inventing simple dishes from disparate ingredients. Surviving such scarcity nurtured enduring traditions, oral histories weaving tales of adversity into the cultural fabric. Wisdom from lean seasons cascaded through generations, embedding cautionary tales as both advice and cultural lessons. Scarce though they were, moments of hope glimmered amid the hardship. This perseverance was as much an acknowledgement of their plight as a celebration of life's fleeting abundance. Emerging from the grasp of hunger each spring wasn't merely a transition, it was an awakening. With every bud and blossom, villagers drew renewed affirmation of life beyond lean tyranny. The season's revival was a dance of devastation meeting abundance, shadows giving way to light. Though spring's arrival did not swiftly amend hunger's scars, it breathed renewed hope into weary villagers, eager once again for the promise of abundance ahead. Life in a medieval village meant sharing your world with unwelcome creatures that scuttled through the shadows and sometimes right out in broad daylight. Fleas, rats, lice. These tiny nuisances were part of daily life, accepted in a reluctant cohabitation that highlighted the precariousness of existing in such times. The ubiquitous presence of vermin wasn't just a source of discomfort, it was a reminder of vulnerability, as these small creatures carried the seeds of great calamity on their backs. Take fleas, for example. Ubiquitous jumpers that thrived amid medieval squalor. They nestled in the thick rushes spread across floors and made their homes in the very seams of the clothes worn without washing for days on end. Their bites left people with raw, itching sores, and their constant presence turned simple tasks into maddening distractions. The flea's irritating persistence was eclipsed only by their deadly role in spreading one of history's most infamous pandemics. Few understood that these minuscule creatures, no larger than a pinhead, were part of the chain that unleashed the bubonic plague, a catastrophe that circled the globe and left millions in its wake. While people scratched at their flea bites, the real itch was a harbinger of much darker days. Then there were rats, bold as brass, scurrying among the wooden beams and thatched roofs that made medieval homes feel more like havens for pests than for people. Rats gnawed through food stores with alarming speed, their presence a constant ruinous force that no barrier seemed to hold back effectively. These agile rodents didn't just steal sustenance, they served as ferry boats for a host of germs and diseases. Historically notorious, rats played an unwitting yet central role in spreading Yersinia pestis, another unwelcome passenger of the plague-carrying flea, solidifying their place in the grim dance of medieval pestilence. Outside, a different kind of vermin battle raged. Swarming flies gathered on farm animals, laying their eggs and turning even the most minor wounds into festering, dangerous sites of infection. Mice and largest pests invaded fields and barns, threatening livestock and precious crops, the backbone of village survival. Here too the struggle against vermin was unending. Attempts at pest control through rudimentary traps and barriers were constant. Yet the victories were often short-lived. Creative methods arose in the face of such challenges. Villagers spread ashes as a deterrent, or employed aromatic herbs like lavender, clinging to the hope that nature would provide respite from its own creations. But these remedies, quaint and aromatic though they might have been, were mostly ineffective against the relentless tide of infestations. When practical measures failed, villagers often turned to superstition, invoking rituals and prayers in desperate acts of spiritual pest control. While there was little scientific basis for these actions, they reflected a deeply human blend of resilience and ritual. The shadow of the plague loomed large over these communities. While the true mechanisms of disease spread were beyond common understanding, vermin were blamed as the dark clouds of suspicion and fear gathered before each wave of sickness. This narrative of pestilent horrors was immortalized by chroniclers who, with terrifying precision, captured the societal upheaval wrought by plague, its effects stretching beyond mere mortality to reshape labour and belief. In the realm of superstition, even a simple scuttling rat might be marked as an omen. Medieval thought wove narratives where vermin weren't just pests but symbolic messengers, their presence interpreted through a lens of foreboding folklore. The noises and signs these creatures produced were cloaked in myth, symbols of an incomprehensible world that humans struggled to control. Medieval homes themselves were perfect for these invaders. Built with thatch and wood, these structures offered countless nooks for pests to thrive. Without the benefit of modern insulation, homes of the era relied on imperfect construction that inadvertently created cosy hideaways for lice, fleas, and rats. These structural flaws were not merely shortcomings, they were necessities dictated by the demands of the time, a trade-off in an age where warmth was a rare commodity. Feast or famine, food brought its challenges. During the bountiful seasons, granaries groaned under the weight of stored food. Yet these storage spaces also invited grain beetles and mice, turning prosperity into peril. The delicate line between a good harvest and disaster was often just a mouse's leap away, creating a relentless cycle of vigilance and loss. Through this ongoing dance of human and pest, a narrative of resilience emerges. Medieval villagers were no strangers to adversity. They adapted continually, improvising with a spirit that illustrates both their ingenuity and tenacity. Living alongside vermin was a persistent struggle, yet within it lay a testament to human endurance, one where the harshness of life didn't extinguish vitality, but ingrained a deeper resolve to persevere amidst shadows, vermin, and the weighing dread of forces beyond control. In this battle against tiny adversaries, they proved that the flame of life, though dimmed, would never be wholly snuffed out. In the dim confines of a medieval village, the word doctor was an elusive concept, more akin to a whispered legend than a figure of real flesh. The villagers leaned on the wisdom stored in the hearts of local wise women, herbalists, and clergy members for whatever healing they could offer. Their medical guidance, immortalised in text like the Leech Book of Bald, was a curious amalgam of herbal remedies, faith, and spontaneous insight, forming a precarious web spun from the fortune teller's hand, rather than scientific stringency. Medicine then was a delicate dance between belief and desperation, a trial and error saga etched into everyday life. In a world where medicine wove itself tightly with spiritual threads, pursuing a medical career was as likely a calling as it was a marred destiny. Monasteries, with their musty halls scented with incense and parchment, served as hobbled-together hospitals where healing rituals involved elaborate prayers and kaleidoscopic concoctions. Nevertheless, these institutions laid down the jagged cobblestones for future medical learning, however fumbling and fallible. The villagers, navigating a life riddled with ailments and lurking doom, often found solace in the idea that healing was divinely situated, beyond the capacities of mere mortals. Amid this landscape, herbalists became the unsung architects of survival. They plucked yarrow, brewed comfrey, and harvested valerian, crafting remedies wrapped in the earth's own embrace. The herbals they produced, rich with folklore and medicinal recipes, whispered stories of resilience against nature's harsh verdicts. Yet their remedies, limited by a dearth of biological insights, often soothed symptoms while the true maladies bloomed unchecked. Herbalists walked a fine line, viewed as both saviours and scapegoats, at times finding their practices branded as witchcraft, a superstitious brand with dire consequences. Still, these practitioners persisted, their roles reaching beyond mere healing to centre the village's collective resilience. Every village dawn bore the weight of potential misfortune, where the cracking of bones or the shearing of a blade could bring ruin. A simple cut, if left to the unseen caress of infection, could spiral into a deadly fate. Bone setting existed without anesthesia's numbing mercy, requiring a fortitude that tested the bounds of human endurance. Wounds were stitched with sinews and the gods of luck, performed by hands ignorant to the invisible threats of bacteria and disease. Amidst this peril, villagers learned to cloak themselves in the armour of caution and charms, weaving a fragile protection against accident-induced ruin. Teeth, those silent sentinels of health, stood little chance in the absence of dental enlightenment. Toothaches, with their merciless grip, were endured until extraction loomed as the only reprieve. Blacksmiths or barbers, those unlikely stewards of oral health, performed the grim task with grimier tools, while alcohol dulled only the edges of the torment. The wealthy, frequenting sugar, found cavities an unwelcome guest, while peasants suffered abrasive wear instead. With scant means to care for their teeth, villagers faced a cycle of pain that contributed to a slow, unrelenting decline, echoing the daily strife of their medieval existence. In times when herbs couldn't suffice, the villagers turned earnestly to faith. The church emerged as both sanctuary and solace, its spires reaching for divine mercy, its rituals interwoven with hopes for miraculous cures. Amidst the incense-curled air, congregations sought the blessings of saints, each sacred invocation a bridge to spiritual restoration. Saintly relics promised comfort, while and healing through faith was a shared thread in the community's tapestry, weaving resilience from necessity and belief. Mental health, though silently looming, was often misinterpreted as divine retribution or sorcery's whisper. Those bearing the burden of mental affliction were often isolated, their conditions misjudged and mishandled through religious misconstruction. Unfortunately, fasting, exorcisms, or harsh confinement served as substitutes for understanding, mirroring a worldview trapped in shadows of misunderstanding. Serfs continued to toil, masking their suffering behind laborious routines, while communities cringe away from the unfamiliar. Even where eyes turned towards lost souls, society's body moved slowly, with scars of silence threading through generations. When epidemics emerged from the dark corners of obscurity, the medieval world quaked in its fragile boots. Each wave, the Black Death, as notorious as it was nihilistic, brought an end to countless lives, tumbling what is known into chaos. Villagers often fled their homes, driven by fear palpable enough to spark insanity. The chronicles of the time tell tales of desolation, of populations vanishing like the morning mist, of hope sinking beneath the rising tide of plague. In these fraught passages, society trembled and transformed, its fabric stretched and torn under the weight of death's omnipotent grip. Childbirth, in its tender expectancy, also tread a path riddled with dire uncertainties. The midwives carried wisdom in their hands, armed with herbs and intuition, faced down a prospect as deadly as it was miraculous. Complications, unthwarted and feared, were spectres at the birthing bed, with mothers and infants bound together in a perilous gamble. Tales of survival and sorrow, whispered from one generation to the next, painted childbirth as a sacred odyssey, a test of faith intertwined with life and loss. Without the reassurance of modern science, the process was marked by devotion and fraught hope. In a realm where scientific certainty fluttered scant and wary, superstition anchored medieval medicine. Belief in talismans and chants suffused with ancient magic opened a door into a world where logic dared not tread. Yet even viewed through the foggy lens of time, these practices yield a vision of humanity grasping for understanding against chaos. Medicinal folklore mirrored the communal need for explanation and comfort when empirical evidence stood silent. Such practices cast long shadows, hinting at an age where the convergence of myth and medicine painted the world with shades of uncertainty and resilience both remarkable and real. In the medieval landscape, predators lurked at the fringes of every village, embodying both tangible threats and shadowy fears. Among these, wolves prowled at night, their howls piercing the silence, striking terror into the hearts of villagers. With livestock as their prey, these creatures could decimate a community's means of sustenance in a single raid. Imagine farmers wielding nothing more than pitchforks, gathering under the moonlight to drive off these marauders, both a survival tactic and a binding communal ritual. Wolves, however, carried significance beyond their physical threat. In a world where nature was imbued with mystique, these animals symbolized chaos and danger. The medieval mind often saw them as envoys of the devil, lurking on the fringes of ordered life. Sprinklings of superstitions painted them as omens of evil, complicating the already dire need to control their numbers. Though bounties for wolf pelts were offered, these efforts were as haphazard as they were desperate, with villages continually at nature's mercy. Travel presented another peril, as roads and pathways were haunted by highwaymen. These outlaws, born of necessity as much as choice, preyed on travellers caught between villages. Famine, displacement, and an unravelling social order birthed bands of desperados who transformed mundane journeys into perilous quests. Travellers clung to prayer and any armed escort they could muster, their fears rooted in grim tales of caravans looted and lives shattered. Yet, amid the menace, there was a strange allure to these highwaymen, later celebrated in ballads as audacious rogues. In a society where class lines were carved in stone, these stories embodied a paradoxical freedom, albeit one stemming from desperation. Underneath the bold imagery lay the harsh truth. Many were displaced peasants or beckless soldiers, navigating a world of systemic injustices and bleak opportunities. Back at home, villages were not immune to danger from within. Out-of-work youth and disgruntled serfs driven by hunger and neglect turned to banditry, siphoning scarce resources from their own neighbours. The legal records of the time are rife with tales of petty theft escalating into organised crime, further straining the fragile trust within communities. With lords indifferent and formal policing absent, villagers devised their own forms of justice, patrolling streets and appealing for external aid that seldom arrived. Without the shelter of walls or the protection of garrisons, entire villages were vulnerable to marauding groups asserting dominance through brute force. Feudal lords, intent on power plays, rarely prioritised the defence of their peasants, embroiled instead in their own distant disputes. In their absence, villagers cobbled together makeshift militias, an amalgam of hope and desperation. The battles were uneven, often concluding with assaults that left homes plundered and spirits broken. violent incursions did more than rupture immediate security. They disrupted the seasonal rhythms essential for village survival. The economic vacuum spawned by plunder and abduction initiated cycles of poverty, sowing seeds for future unrest. Mercenary work beckoned some. Others hardened into banditry, as villages clawed for recovery amid an unending siege of threats. Wars among the nobility cast villages into broader conflicts, intertwining them with feuds that acknowledged neither their autonomy nor their safety. On contested lands, villages transformed into pawns within a lethal chess game. Lords hungry for resources often used requisitioning as a guise for raiding, despoiling what little the land yielded. Furthermore, alliances with one lord guaranteed nothing against another's ambitions, as villages were ground beneath the feudal boots of shifting power. The tireless strain of potential battle affected every aspect of village life, from conscription draining the able-bodied to robber lords sowing despair. Legal demands for men-at-arms and dwindling labour pools painted a grim picture of uncertainty, captured in the poignant cries of those who wrote letters and maintained state records. Even the conquerors bore calamity, as armies unwittingly carried death in their wake. Soldiers and mercenaries bivouacked in fields, left behind potent pathogens. This unintended biological warfare laid villages low long after banners withdrew. Medieval documents paint these collisions of campaigns and illness, illustrating the grim reciprocity of war and disease. In recognizing perpetual threats, legal adaptations slowly sprouted. Authorities developed rudimentary measures like regional patrols and bounties for predatory captures. These legal frameworks echoed communal resolve, reflecting the sobering adjustment to realities where communal vigils became essential for survival. Villagers also harnessed superstition, invoking rituals and symbols to shield their homes from an incomprehensible world. Charms against evil, talismans wielded at will, these practices formed an intrinsic layer of protection. Though modern eyes might dismiss them, these were real expressions of medieval life, a life where prayers and charms interwove with tangible defences against an ever-looming dread. Through these endeavours, medieval villages maintained a precarious existence, engulfed in risks yet resilient, embodying a terrifying stability. The past, with its hardships and defences, offers glimpses of a tenacity strikingly familiar, an enduring testimony to humanity's unyielding spirit against the assaults of nature, fellow man, and time itself. In the dim haze of medieval life, a shadow loomed over the joy of childbirth, a chilling spectre of uncertainty, where nearly half of all children would not live to see their 10th birthday. Life, teetering on the brink of survival, offered no guarantees. In these precarious times, the laughter of children was often overshadowed by the spectre of disease and deprivation. Families, acutely aware of this grim reality, navigated a world where disease was rampant, malnutrition was common, and the next moment was never promised. From the moment of birth, infants were thrust into a perilous dance with death. Childbirth itself was a risky endeavour, with midwives, veterans though they were, lacking the knowledge and tools of modern medicine. The very act of bringing a new life into this world could be fraught with complications that quickly turned deadly. As infants drew their first breaths, in an era unacquainted with sanitation, they faced a world brimming with invisible threats. Home births, in the close confines of cottages often shared with livestock, escalated the risk of infections. These humble, crowded dwellings were fertile grounds for illnesses, where a simple cough might spell doom for an infant with an undeveloped immune system. Mothers, their own nutrition often lacking, struggle to provide for their newborns, making malnutrition a silent killer lurking in the shadows. The pervasive threat of famine further darkened the prospects for survival. In an age when agriculture danced to the erratic tunes of weather and primitive techniques, food scarcity was a constant spectre. Its shadow fell heaviest on children, whose growing bodies required sustenance that was rarely available. Historical echoes from epochs like the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 bear witness to these trials, with chronicles reflecting the redundancies and recurring losses families faced. The fragile health of medieval children was a precarious balancing act, perilously swaying against the backdrops of malnutrition and inadequate healthcare, further harshened by societal expectations and demands. Contributions were required from the youngest age, adding yet another layer of risk in their already fragile existence. Set against this backdrop was the omnipresent reaper of contagious disease. Measles, smallpox, and diphtheria were not mere childhood rites of passage, but potential death sentences, particularly harsh in a society bereft of medical science. With an understanding of medicine mired in the theory of humours and ruled by superstition, the remedies available were often bewilderingly simple or potently ineffective, a mixture of prayer and primitive concoction. Yet in the face of these lethal odds, hope flickered through efforts mingled with ancient traditions and superstitions. Parents, desperate to shield their children from harm, put their faith in protective charms and rituals intended to ward off evils believed to bring sickness. These tokens of hope, however rooted in myth, underscored the deep desire for life in a world where death was a constant companion. Remedies passed down through generations, herbs, minerals, and animal parts mixed in the hope of warding off ailments, reflected both the persistence of human hope and the desperation felt in a time before science. Class too played its part in this medieval tale of survival. Wealthier families, with their relative access to better food and slightly more hygienic living conditions, might stave off death's advances, though never completely. Their privilege provided a buffer, but money could not protect from the contagions that knew no rank nor station. Peasant families bore the brunt of this reality, bound to the caprices of land and labour, living lives that were relentless marathons of survival. In rural settings, devoid of the scant medical assistance available to the wealthier, children of the poor were doubly imperilled. Despite these daunting hardships, medieval families found joy and hope in the meagre certainties. The birth of a child, a glimmer of life amidst adversity, was a cause for celebration. Parents imparted stories and practical skills, guiding their children through the cultural and functional tapestries essential to surviving their world. Family support networks, akin to today's safety nets, offered vital lifelines. Communities, sharing burdens during dire times, formed bonds as durable as any castle wall. Archaeological findings offer poignant vignettes into these past lives, with burial sites yielding silent testimonies to the trials borne and hopes held. The clustering of infant graves, excavated with care, hints at epidemic waves that swept through unprepared medieval settlements. Studies of skeletal remains sketch out narratives of malnutrition and disease, revealing the relentless dance with danger faced by children. Despite such shadows, these remains also speak to a society fiercely tenacious in the face of mortality's certainty, a society fueled by hope. As hearth fires burn low, this tale of medieval children is not merely a reflection of a beastly past, but a mirror to modern progress, reminding us how far we have advanced in child well-being. This chronicle, rich in both poignancy and lessons, invites us to gaze back with respect, acknowledging the fragile threads that wove the fabric of medieval childhood, and to remember the inexhaustible resilience of the human spirit. In the medieval village, danger was around every corner, looming like unseen ghosts, particularly where folks eked out their daily bread. Take the blacksmith, pounding away at glowing metal. One false move, one errant spark, and catastrophe could strike. These artisans, muscles straining under weighty hammers, knew that molten iron was indifferent to their skin. Meanwhile, the thatcher, perched precariously on roofs like birds in the wind, risked life and limb with every gust. Down below, farmers wrestled with implements that were as unforgiving as the earth they tilled. Their hands bore testimony to the sharpness of their tools, marked by countless cuts and scars. But these were just the sharp, sudden hazards. There was also the slow grind of work wearing down the body. Knees ached from endless squatting in fields, backs bowed under heavy loads. There was no ergonomic design, no protective gear, just a world where leather gloves were a luxury. Legal codes of the time noted these hardships, assigning them value and compensation, but the rules could only offer faint comfort to those whose bodies were broken by their toils. And once the working day ended, home wasn't a refuge from danger. Within those humble walls, daily tasks were loaded with risks. A moment's lapse with a knife or scythe meant fresh blood on the floor, while open hearths threatened to set sleeves aflame or send boiling water crashing to the ground. Long-term exposure to smoky hearths left an unseen but heavy mark on breathing, testing the body's endurance in a ceaseless trial of skill and resilience. The simple act of milking a cow posed danger. A swift kick could maim rather than just bruise a hand. Even play didn't shield children from danger. In a world without plastic toys, imagination meant crafting playthings from whatever lay around, often dangerously. As adults laboured under heavy workloads, children roamed free, climbing trees and chasing animals, resulting in broken bones and painful recoveries. Parents turned to herbal remedies for care. But against unseen bacteria, even the most devoted efforts often fell short. These early brushes with danger taught resilience, priming children for the more perilous adult world. In accidents the village bound together. The thud of a fall or the cry of injury was a communal rallying call. Midwives and wise women extended their skills beyond their typical duties, attending the wounded with herbal poultices and makeshift splints, hoping to see the worst safely through. These events shaped a village's unwritten codes of safety, a testament to shared vulnerability. Accidents tightened community bonds, but also sparked tensions as blame could be as swift as aid. For severe injuries, the prospect of surgery was both a nightmare and a beacon of hope. Lacking anaesthesia, patients faced operations wide awake in grim endurance. Surgeons worked quickly, their hands practiced under pressure. Each procedure a gamble between death and survival. Amputations required strength and haste, while post-operation survival depended on the body's natural resilience. Or luck. Often those who emerged scarred but breathing became village legends, their stories echoing through time as reminders of human tenacity. Medieval laws, attempting to bring order to chaos, acknowledge these risks with codes detailing injury compensation. Weregild calculated the worth of a lost limb, putting a price on flesh in stark figures. These laws reflected an understanding of collective responsibility amid unpredictable circumstances. The Church interpreted mishaps as divine intervention, offering a celestial frame to human suffering. Legal records from the time now illuminate not just the accidents, but the values and beliefs of those who lived through them. Journeying between villages wasn't free of peril either. Unforgiving roads, unpaved and pitted, turned travel into an ordeal. Carts strained by the uneven paths risked collapse, and on foot or horseback, travellers faced both the landscape and human predators. Bandits lay in wait, preying on those who failed to seek safety in numbers or shelter before nightfall, turning essential travel into a careful balance of caution and courage. While accidents visited all, noble and peasant alike, their responses diverged widely. Nobles could summon medical aid, relying on wealth to procure the best care, but privilege didn't confer invincibility. Despite social layers, broken bones and festering wounds remained equalizers. Noble accidents became stories that spoke to the fragility of status, illustrating mortality's indifference to wealth or position. In a time teetering on fortune's whims, faith and superstition masked the unknowable. Omens and relics wrapped incidents in layers of divine interpretation, from divine retribution to rival enchantments. These beliefs were woven into survival strategies, with villagers grasping rituals to stave off misfortune, turning to priests and wise women for consolation or celestial readings. Faith merged with practical life, a silent partner in each day's survival. Yet despite these ever-looming threats, medieval life forged resilience. People adapted with invention and grit, crafting tools and homes to suit new realities. Stories of those who thrived despite loss became an enduring cultural inheritance, proving adversity as a wellspring of creativity. These legacies continue to inspire, mirroring our struggles and triumphs, reminding us that the medieval spirit of survival is not so distant from our own. In the medieval village, life unfolded like a tapestry, woven with threads of uncertainty and resilience. These villages, nestled within landscapes both beautiful and harsh, were worlds shaped by both the familiar rhythms of community and the persistent shadow of mortality. Imagine a place where surviving another day was a triumph against an onslaught of natural and human challenges, where each dawn brought no promises, only a test of will, resilience, and the strange caprice of fortune. Community was the glue that held these villages together, a living network of relationships crafted from necessity and bound by shared struggle. Neighbours weren't just people, they were lifelines, vital in times of need. When famine or disease knocked on the door, having a generous neighbour could mean the difference between survival and demise. Here, the weight of fate was shared, where trust and cooperation were essential for enduring the grueling cycle of lean months and frequent threats. Amidst this communal framework, knowledge was the currency of survival, passed down through generations, sometimes whispered in hushed tones or sung around a flickering fire. The village healer, wise in the ways of herbs and lore, was as crucial as any tool or weapon. Their remedies, drawn from both practical understanding and deep-rooted superstition, were the tools of healing in a world where faith and science were deeply entwined. Knowledge extended beyond medicine to agriculture, where the wisdom of when to sow and harvest marked the difference between abundance and destitution. Yet knowledge danced with superstition, and here was a world where reality blurred with belief. Charms and rituals provided comfort amidst the chaos, a semblance of control when the world felt like it was teetering on the brink. But these beliefs were double-edged, sometimes obscuring more tangible solutions. In many ways, these superstitions form the skeletal framework of society, binding villagers with shared rituals that, while comforting, could also mislead. Medieval life thrived on ironies, where logic twisted within its own confines. Practices that seem bizarre to modern sensibilities often served rational purposes. Bloodletting, for instance, was seen as a means to balance bodily humours, an attempt at medicine within its own context, despite exacerbating illnesses more often than curing them. The abundance of saints' festival days brought both jubilant celebration and the unintended spread of disease, faith, and fragility, walking hand in hand. Resourcefulness was celebrated, seen in creative solutions that helped villages endure. But this ingenuity often carried the seeds of its own demise. Fields tilled tirelessly without knowledge of crop rotation grew barren. A somber lesson in the limitations of immediate needs versus long-term sustainability. Yet, resourcefulness persisted as a testament to human inventiveness, where even old cloaks were mended and worn until they quite literally fell apart. Luck, capricious and unfathomable, was often the silent companion of survival. Without forecast or medical insight, fate's hand felt ever present. Fortune's whims dictated whether one thrived or succumbed, whether a harvest would flourish or a storm would ravage. Survival wasn't merely a matter of effort, but of being in the right place at the right time, or sometimes miraculously avoiding the wrong place altogether. Tales and legends provided a unique lens through which villagers viewed their world. Stories recounted by the warm glow of the hearth acted as moral compasses, embedding lessons within their narratives. They were cultural binders and guides, likely containing more valuable life advice than initially apparent. Through fantastical accounts, villagers absorbed cautionary lessons about prudence, skepticism, and survival strategies. Wills and testaments, those solemn documents of final intention, carried weighty cultural significance. Beyond simple property distribution, they were acts that combined practicality with a nod to the spiritual uncertainty of the afterlife. These records reveal the intimacy of medieval life, sketching a picture of societal structures and relationships that have been preserved in time. In medieval villages, survival was a story of resilience, resourcefulness, and the unpredictable brush of destiny. Communities thrived within their constraints, proving that even amidst adversity and uncertainty, human spirit can carve out an enduring mark. How long might you have lasted in such a world? It was a gut-wrenching yet awe-inspiring dance between ingenuity, community support, and plain old luck. As we close this exploration of the medieval village, let us appreciate not just the trials, but the triumphs of our ancestors, whose lives remind us of the indomitable human spirit. If this journey through time intrigued you, consider subscribing for more tales of history's hidden corners.